The dragon's persecution of believing Israel, Revelation 12:13 through 17. And when the dragon saw that he had been cast down to the earth, he gave chase to the woman who had borne the male child. And to the woman were given 2 wings of the great eagle, so that she might fly into the desert, to a place prepared for her, where she is going to be sustained there away from the presence of the serpent for a time and times and half a time. And the serpent spewed forth from his mouth after the woman water like a river, in order to sweep her away. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and drank up the river which the dragon had spewed forth from his mouth. And the dragon was enraged at the woman, and he went away to make war with the rest of her seed, even those who are keeping the commandments of God and maintaining their testimony to Jesus. Revelation 12:13 through 17. Beginning in verse 13, we find the first earthly event of the Great Tribulation proper. Satan's first assault upon the people of God, foreshadowed in the final stanzas of the heavenly hymn previously studied, Revelation 12:11 and 12, is an all-out attack against the largest concentration of Jewish believers on earth, specifically all who had responded to the ministry of Moses and Elijah and the 144,000, and who now reside within the state of Israel. As we have mentioned before, while Scripture does not say so explicitly, yet it is more than probable that the new remnant of faith present in Israel and described as the object of the devil's wrath in chapter 12 has neither arisen primarily from among the citizens of Israel proper, nor does it constitute a majority of them, Romans 9:27. These must instead have assembled there from elsewhere in the world in response to the ministering of the 144,000, just as they themselves were drawn to Jerusalem through the ministry of Moses and Elijah. Moreover, these verses also indicate that this trend in migration of believers of Jewish ancestry to the present-day Jewish state will be a uniquely Jewish phenomenon. Gentile believers in nations outside of Babylon will face persecution in their own countries, following God's frustration of Satan's plan to eliminate this new Jewish remnant. Compare Revelation 12:17, which marks the inception of the Great Persecution. From what we know about present-day realities, it seems extraordinarily unlikely, given the apparent magnitude of the wave of Jewish immigration to Israel, which will result during the tribulation's first half, that the state of Israel, which has never been particularly welcoming of non-Jewish immigration, especially when the intended newcomers have been evangelical Christians, will allow any significant number of Gentile believers who might desire to come and study at the feet of Moses and Elijah to do so. We who are Gentiles should not lament this fact overly much. Each of us has his own gifts, his own mission field, and a particular effectiveness of ministry ordained, intended, and empowered by God, 1 Corinthians 12:4 through 6. That we are to remain behind in our places, ministering and witnessing to our own countrymen, is clearly what God has in mind for us, even though, and especially since, in very many cases, this will result in intensive persecution and even martyrdom. Babylon constitutes a special case. As we have also mentioned before, there are indications from Scripture that as the beast's original power base, Babylon will be somewhat of a safe haven during this period of intense persecution, although the safety involved must be understood in relative terms. For there will indeed be a call for all believers to flee Babylon in the days before her destruction, and we shall have more to say about this in part 5 of this series, a fact that in and of itself suggests a large number of believers are still residing within her borders and effectively surviving, if not thriving, up until that point. Before beginning our detailed exegesis of this section of Revelation, it will be helpful to recap the series of events which will transpire just prior to the flight of the Jewish believers into the desert described here in chapter 12. Prior to the blowing of the 7th trumpet and the commencement of the Great Tribulation proper we have seen, Antichrist's complete and total victory in his second campaign against the south, Daniel 11:29 and 30, 40 and 43. The collapse of all remaining organized resistance to Antichrist, his armed forces, and his empire worldwide, Revelation 13:3 and 4. The plundering of the riches of Egypt, Antichrist's final objective at the end of the second campaign, Daniel 11:43. The failed assassination attempt against Antichrist, Daniel 11:30. Antichrist's subsequent return to Israel with a substantial contingent of his armed forces, Daniel 11:30. The breaking of the treaty with Israel by Antichrist and his war on Moses and Elijah, Daniel 9:27 and Revelation 11:1 through 13. The erecting of the abomination which causes spiritual desolation and Antichrist's session in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God, Daniel 11:31 and 2 Thessalonians 2:4. The expansion as compulsory of his new worldwide religion, whose object of worship is himself and his father the devil, Revelation 13. The dragon's reaction to his expulsion from heaven. It is at this point that the seventh trumpet sounds, and Satan, along with all his angelic forces there residing, are cast out of heaven and confined to the earth for the duration of the tribulation. Thus the dramatic steps listed, designed to finally implement his grand scheme for frustrating the plan of God, by eliminating faith from the earth and establishing in its stead a visible and physical worldwide kingdom whose inhabitants universally worship him, and his Antichrist meets with an immediate and equally dramatic consequence, the termination of his access to heaven and the presence of God, which access Satan had continued to enjoy up until this point. In all this we see clearly the plan of God in action and the devil's schemes in reaction. Just as Satan is on the point of carrying through his fondest desires, he is cast to the earth, no doubt in part because of the actions he has taken to bring those plans close to fruition, the spawning of Antichrist, the establishment of a one-world rule, the setting up of the abomination of desolation in the temple court, and his session in the temple of God being the primary apparent violations of the ground rules under which he and his compatriots have heretofore been allowed to operate. And although the effects of the devil's intensified depredations on the earth create the greatest wave of apostasy in history and will soon result in the greatest outbreak of persecution of believers, in short order it will be revealed how even these most distressful events have only served to bring about the fulfillment of what God has had in mind all along. This will take place when the Messiah returns at the apex of the tribulation's final battle, to lay all of God's enemies low, to rescue the remnant of believers, to deliver the nation of Israel, and to establish his kingdom of light and justice, with Satan and his followers removed not only from heaven, but from the earth as well for the duration of Christ's millennial rule. Finally, in this regard, although the dragon, Satan, is viewed here as the actor in the persecution of the woman, which follows immediately upon the heels of his expulsion from heaven, the earthly agent for this persecution is not the devil, but his Antichrist. The consonance of action between the devil and his son can be seen in the similarity with which Scripture describes the two. Comparing these verses with the immediately following opening verses of chapter 13, we see that both the dragon and the beast are red, both have 7 heads, and both have 10 horns. We will discuss the various aspects of this symbolism in section 5, but suffice it to say here that the complete agreement and seamlessness in planning and execution between the devil and Antichrist respectively is effectively brought out by this deliberate similarity in symbolism.